Yeah, so welcome. Thanks for coming, those who are part of Dr. Young's class, my class, and all the other folks. Thanks for being here. We're excited to have Judith Rapley, class of 1992, best class ever, right? There we go, Mrs. Mulligan agrees. All right, so Judith and I were classmates here at Houghton, as with Sharon Mulligan, and so we went through classes with Dr. Young. We have stats together? Do you have stats?
Yes,
with? Yeah. Stats with Dr. Young, and we survived. So, but Judith is a competent clinician. She's a licensed clinical social worker. She's a life coach and an all-around amazing person. And I count her as a close friend as well. So I'm glad to have her here. Once Judith gets set up, I will give her the floor so she has as much time as possible to talk today. So thanks for being here, and we're done at 2:15.
Okay.
Is that right? Yeah, 2:15.
Fantastic. So I think I have all the technology going. Hopefully sync together. Let's see. All right, good. So hello, everyone. Oh, no. See, I'm from New York now. So hello, everyone.
Hello.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much for your greeting. I'm so excited to be here. I want to thank a few people first. Of course, Bill, Dr. Young, as well as Phyllis, wherever she is. I saw her somewhere. She just stepped out. And the staff from the advancement department, each of them, those that I've known for a while and those that are new. Hi, Mark. Mark got me here. But I also want to shout out someone, and they're going to be very embarrassed when I shout them out. I have to shout out Professor Brandon Bates. Give him a hand. Give him a hand. Give him a hand. And let me tell you why. I also need to ask if any of you had my class, Cultural Competency, last semester. If you did, raise your hand. Raise it high. Okay. The rest of you need to give a hand. No, leave your hands up. Leave your hands up. The rest of you need to give them a hand because they and I survived my first online course as an adjunct professor here last year. So give them a hand. And why is Brandon important? Because he helped us and helped me specifically through my trauma. Okay. We're going to talk about trauma a little bit today. Thank God they survived and so did I. Probably because we tried to accomplish an entire year's worth of work in 8 weeks. So for those who survived along with me, I am thrilled to have you. Glad you came back, glad you're still alive. And I'm here to redeem my, no, I'm just joking. I'm here to share some additional information in some other areas. I want us to take a few minutes to just center ourselves a little bit. By that I mean, take a deep breath. That's all I mean when I say that. That's because we're going to be talking about family history, early childhood, and for some, that might bring up a lot of thoughts or memories. So all we're going to do, because we happen usually not to breathe well, we usually take in short breaths. I want to invite you to do the same with me. 5 breaths, 5 seconds in, hold, and 5 seconds out. Just to bring us into the room to understand that we're here today, April 2023. Not 2000 for some of you, not 2005. But that we're here in this room at this time learning about this content. I also want to give permission that if anyone gets uncomfortable at any point, right, because I'm never sure what content may affect someone in some way, that you're free to practice the same breaths that we're taking here. But if that's not sufficient for you, that you are able and willing and to leave the room if you need to. Just want to give those permissions in advance. So let's take a couple of breaths. All it's going to be is about 45 seconds. 5 in, 5 hold, and 5 out. Let's go. Again, another 5 in. Hold. And out. And the last one. Another 5 in. Hold. And out. Thank you very much. You already heard my name, Judith Rapley, the things I do amongst a number of other things. That's me. And so today we're going to be speaking about the importance of our family systems in our stories, how our childhood affects our life stories, overcoming difficulties and trauma in our upbringing, and listening to the story of others in a culturally relevant and culturally sensitive way. The importance of our family systems in our stories. Let me share a few stories with you and let's see if you can sort of imagine or figure out who these stories are about. Two brothers, both of them work. One thinks the other one is better than the other one. They give their father a gift for Father's Day. One felt a little bit jealous about it. You know, we would call him a hater, right? So guess what he did? He killed his brother and buried him. Talk about family stories, right? A number of brothers. Think about 12. The youngest one, or close to the youngest one, the second to youngest one. You know, the father, it's a special occasion, maybe his birthday or something like that. He puts a coat on him, buys him the flyest coat possible. And then he says, the other brothers see that, and they're like, wait a minute, where are our coats? I'm feeling a way about that. Yeah. I'm feeling a way about that. So they decided to take him, put him in a hole, tell the father that something happened to him, and move on about their lives. Siblings, right? Right? If you have any, you know you love them, but you also have some other feelings about them. Then there's this woman. She happened to be what we call nowadays a sex worker. She heard there were some men coming from a very important organization to her particular area. They come to her house, she hides them, and they escape, and she becomes known for having helped them escape it. This woman actually became the descendant of someone really, really, really important. Can you guess who some of the characters were in those three stories? Anyone?
Joseph.
The first, which one was Joseph?
The second one.
The second one was Joseph and his brothers. Yeah, talk about sibling rivalry. Right? Good. Anyone knows what the first story was about? Cain and Abel. The first brothers that we know of, right? My goodness. And then the last story, the third story that I spoke of.
Rahab.
Rahab, right. And who did she become? Who was one of her descendants? Someone said it. Jesus. Exactly. One of someone that his legacy came from someone who was, in the Bible terminology, a prostitute. In today's language, it would be perhaps a sex worker. What's my point? My point is family has been here before the beginning of times, right? If there's one thing that we come into the world with, we have, whether we're adopted, we're in foster care, we're born into our natural family, is that we have a family. We gotta have a family. Whatever the dimensions that they are, we have family. I'm used to saying that they're neither perfect families nor dysfunctional families. We're all somewhere in the middle, right, as it pertains to families. So family systems and families are important. Of course, I'm going to start with a little bit of theory for you in regards to this particular family system, right? The original or the originator of family systems theory. But there are tons of other theories that have come since and after that speak to family theory in a different way. So this is one particular one, family therapy through Bowen Murray. I use this interspersed in the work that I do, but not in a purist way. I mentioned purist way because throughout my talk today, I'm going to speak about taking bits and pieces from different models because of the need of my clients and in order to meet clients where they are. So if you can read, because your eyes are probably better than mine, my glasses are over there somewhere. Someone read what it says about family. Or someone in the front. Anyone. Go ahead.
Interconnected parts that is considered a structure wherein every action on an individual affects the other.
Right, they affect one another. The central principle is a connection. When I work utilizing a very loose family systems model, I change a little bit that central principle there from its original one, in that I consider the entire family the system, not just an identified person. Why do I do that? Because oftentimes when there's an identified patient, which if you're working in a clinic where that's required, you have to identify who the patient is. But within the work that I do in private practice, when that happens, usually there's a level of stigma attached to that particular person that's identified as the client. So I choose to look at the entire family as a client and then work with them in that particular modality and way. That's exceptionally important when there are children in the family. When I used to work with children, I don't have a lot of children that I work with at this time. Children would come in and feel like they were the what? In our family, they were the problem. And that was not a comfortable feeling for that child, nor useful in some ways. And I saw how oftentimes that impacted my ability to connect with the child and help them to connect with the family, as well as bring the other individuals into accountability in the family work. Goals, you see some of the goals there: to develop and maintain healthy boundaries, to promote problem solving within the family and understanding within one another, and then adjust them for the last one, to reduce conflict within the family. Hopefully that's the case in the therapeutic work of the family. Techniques, there are a number of techniques and tools that you can use when you're doing specific family work. I usually really enjoy using genograms, right? Because there's so much that you can learn when someone begins to do their work in terms of a genogram. I did my genogram here at Houghton for the first time with the person who happened to be Michael Astorian. He was the person who I think had Bill's job, or the job that Bill has now, and that was my first therapist, my first counselor. And so coming from another country here and trying to understand what it was like to leave my family and how to interact with them in a different way while being here, as the first person who went to college, Mike at that time helped me to figure out how to use the genogram to not only understand the members of my family, right, which was a little bit beyond what I typically knew because of the fact that my family, I come from a family of missionaries, so I knew my immediate family, but didn't know as much as in terms of my extended family. So we pulled some of them into the story to help me realize and to learn things about how my family had moved in different ways, not just my nuclear family, but my extended family, and some dynamics that were showing up within my family. Not only are you able to understand the people and the relationships through a genogram, you're able to understand interactions and dynamics and sometimes patterns that are not visible to the eyes, that are a little bit more in terms of behavioral and so forth. So again, I really enjoy using the genograms. And then there's some others there about asking factual questions. When I spoke to the group this morning, I spoke to them about sometimes there's a discussion or debate in groups or families about what actually happened, right? And what actually happened is actually only about the events. But each person's experience of what happens is different. And so in working with families, there's the need to ask what actually happened, even though you understand clearly that there's some skewness that's going to happen there, but also what each person's experience was. And then it speaks to the major stages of therapy within that particular modality, and that includes reducing anxiety, increasing level of differentiation, and fusion and neutralization. I have one example where I was working with a mother and her daughter in terms of stage 2 of my work together. And I remember this day I was working with both of them, and I remember the daughter saying, "You're trying to break us up! You're trying to break us up!" And she was furious in terms of my attempts to increase their level of differentiation. Over time, I sat there and as I listened to her, my thought was, yeah, I think I am. Right? Because there was a certain level of enmeshment and over-connectedness between this mother and this child and her daughter, and they were not able to sort of see each other in a way that was differentiated. And so she got upset a couple of months later and she left, but her mother continued to work with me. And I suggested to her that she seek another individual therapist for herself, which she did. And I'm glad to say that after a few years in her own individual work and in my work with the mother, they were both able to do well to then move to the level of fusion and neutralization. The daughter now has a baby and got married. She now has friends. That was one of the challenges when they first met me. She had no one else outside her mother. Her mother was her all in all. Her mother was really burdened by that because she was not able to connect with other people. Only thing that in looking back, when I reflect on my own work, I would say that perhaps I might have moved them to stage 2 too soon, before we had reduced anxiety enough based on what they needed and based on the level of connection that they had. I also found out in my work with them that there was some level of trauma that had made that connection and that over-enmeshment that they both had together in that particular way. And of course, it suggests a number of sessions, but there are times when you will work beyond that depending on the setting that you're in and the needs of the family. How our childhood affects our life stories? Well, in many different ways, right? You're born within a family, one person, several siblings, whatever the family complex nature might be. You have events that happen within that family that most of the time you can agree on what happened, right? Or what are scenarios that may happen. But then you have experiences of those events. And those are quite individual. Even when there are two people in the same family, and I've had a few twins in my work together, their experiences are different. Their experiences are different because of a number of factors. from personal factors to external factors in the other areas of the ecosystem. So you might be in the same place as I am. We might be siblings, but we have two different experiences. And that makes a difference in terms of how our childhood affects our life stories, right? So there are different things. The gender of children affects how they see the events in their families. Where the families are in the family cycle affects the events, affects the experience and the stories of each person in the family. As I mentioned before, my parents are missionaries. And so when my brother and I, who's a year younger than I am, when we moved to our family with my parents, they were new in the ministry. Anyone here knows anything about ministry and new pastors or so forth, they don't send them to the best places, right, when they first are out of seminary or whatever else. So my brother and I really know more of the rundown places that my parents were sent in their missionary work, right? We were in places where we had to like duck because there were all kinds of realities happening in the places that my parents were assigned. My other two sisters, who came many years after, 10, 15 years after, came when my family was in a whole different stage. My parents were now regional directors in the church. So the places where they went, the places that they got, the houses that they got to live in, the neighborhood that they got to live in, were totally different than what my brother had experienced. Well, guess which two became pastors or missionaries as well? My two younger siblings, right? My brother and I were like, we had enough of that. That's okay, we will serve God in other ways. Full-time ministry is not for us, right? So that's just an example of how where you come into a family makes a difference of your experience in some way, form, or fashion. And so this tool, this document, this example shows us the many different ways in which someone's reality can be impacted. I'm going to call out a few from here. So you have the personal and the family, right? In this particular area, with the person, you have mind, body, and spirit, right? These factors affect how a person's story develops. But that's not the only section of it. That's not the only factors that impact them. You have the rest of these. Is Dr. Young here? Good. He's out. I can talk about it for 1 minute. So when I came to Houghton, my major was psychology, right? I wanted to be a school psychologist. And so at the time, based on what I knew, based on what I've been informed and how I was educated, I knew that I wanted to help people, and I wanted to help them in this particular area. But when I came, and based on what I was learning, and that was about 30 years ago, we know what the theory was, we know who the theorists were, and what we were informed about, something about that felt limiting for me. For me, right? Based on my life experiences, based on my culture, based on ethnicity, based on what I had lived, something about that felt limiting for me. I wanted something more. I wanted to understand people in a wider perspective. He's back, right? And so what happened was that there was another professor here by the name of Professor Mary Conklin, who I would speak to, and she would understand my angst, to see people in a wider context, right? From a systemic level. Those are some of the conversations that her and I wrestled with. So she began to expose me through my classes in sociology to some of these other factors that had to do with race, that had to do with religion and spirituality, sexual orientation, ethnicity, that were all part of a culture. And that appealed to who I was and how I wanted to learn and what I wanted to learn about people. And so no, I did not drop my psychology major. Instead, I added a sociology major and left with a double major in psychology, thanks to Dr. Young, and in sociology, thanks to Dr. Mary Conklin. And so that helped me to understand the richness of people, and that was quite in line with how I learned, with how I wanted to understand people, and with how I see people. Those who were in the class that I gave last semester, we talked a lot about how to see people not just in terms of the specific person, but to understand them in terms of their culture, to understand them in terms of socioeconomic background, to understand how their culture or ethnicity is impacted by the world that we live in, and so forth. And so for me, this is the modality with which I use and see people and serve them, no matter the setting in which I am and where I'm found. And I think that is one that's essential in order to see people in a wider and more holistic perspective. So, our stories. We have our families, we have our events, we have our experiences, and then we have impact, right? How those events and experiences impact us further in our lives. The Center for Disease Control has come up with a study by which they have looked at what we call capital T trauma, right? Capital T trauma. Capital T trauma refers to a number of events in a person's life that they decide have impacted them in a way that's significant and has impacted their functioning. That includes some of the things that you see here. And I put this one because in this particular slide I can see it more clearly. 10 items they came up with that they believe are significant in looking at how trauma affects someone in a large or major way. Under this category of household challenges, there is domestic violence, substance abuse, marital stress, I think that was, and parental separation, divorce, incarceration of parents. Under neglect, emotional neglect, physical neglect, emotional abuse, physical abuse, and sexual abuse. They have determined that these 10 factors and how they show up in a person's life, and how many of these factors show up in a person's life, that impacts them mentally, emotionally, physically, and I would add even spiritually. So for example, note up here where it says that for someone who has, or who's determined that they've experienced more than 4 of these events in their lives, look at some of the likelihood of ways in which they'll be impacted both physically and emotionally, right? I'm oftentimes surprised at the lack of understanding as to how stress or trauma impacts the body in so many ways that we're often not paying attention to. Why? We are quicker to say my head hurts, my body hurts, than I'm sad, or I'm angry, or I feel angry, or I feel sad, right? We will sooner go to the doctor for medical care, and we would go to a mental health professional for support or care. And the reality is that they're both, and they're all interconnected. You saw the interconnecting circles a while ago, body, mind, and spirit. They're interconnected. And yet, there's evidence to show that if we are affected and impacted in our experiences or the events, that it also shows up in our bodies. Very shocking, right? Someone with 4 or more ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences, 14 times the number of suicide attempts for that particular person or persons that will fall in that category. And so it is essential that we pay attention to this. In fact, this is another number that is interesting to me, that 67% of the population have at least one of these, right? So in this room, there's at least 60% of you who have at least one. Why did I say 60? Because the determination is that that 60% have been impacted, but that 60% in some instances, 60 to 67% is the number where it falls. Critical and important. People with 6 adverse childhood events or experiences may die or can die 20 years earlier. Why? Because of the fact that this impacts their lives, their functioning, their health, their mental health. However, not everyone experiences these particular capital T traumas. There are others, right? The other 40% or so who experience what is called common T traumas. Common T traumas oftentimes have to do with relational interactions. I had a gentleman who, I was seeing him, he was about 63, 64 years old, and he remembered that throughout his life, around 8, 9 years old, his father repeatedly kept saying, joking, I'm not even sure if you're my child. I'm not even sure you're my child. You know, there's some questions about you being my child. And here was this man at 63 years old in my office speaking to me about how those common T trauma, and you see me sort of making common T trauma, how that impacted him in his sense of self, in his relationship with others, in his relationship with his father throughout his life. So we may not look at that in the same way that we look at a pervasive, intensive, capital T trauma. But the reality is, it depends on how it is affected, how it affects the person, their perception of it. When did that particular experience or event happen? Rather than if it falls only on the larger, pervasive and intense number of items. Well, there are things that make a difference in terms of how those events and experiences affect each of us, right? Everyone having gone through or had a capital T trauma, or the 10 that were found in the adverse childhood experiences, might not be impacted in their life story in the same way, right? You know, people who have had some severe things happen to them and they're like, it happened, I'm over it, whatever, right? And then there are others who, no, this thing kept happening over and over again. She kept saying that, I never felt love, I never felt like I belonged, and that has had a pervasive impact in their life. It is different. In fact, for me, in the way that I work with my clients, I don't care if it's a capital T or a common T. My question is, what happened to you, and how has these events or experiences impacted your life, your functioning, and your experience? So here are some factors that make a difference, right? I'm going to start with the risk factors. From the child. Every child comes into the world with their own reality and their own dynamics. Any parents in the room? Yes, right? And you know, each child is different. They come with their own stuff, right? So what's some of the stuff that can come with a child in terms of the risk factors? Maybe difficult temperament, low self-esteem, impaired cognitive development, poor physical health, poor language skills. That will impact that child's story. On the other hand, that child may have an easy temperament, good social and emotional skills, well-developed cognitive skills, good physical health, good language skills, and their story look different, even when they're in the same family, right? Then there are family dynamics that we ought to consider in terms of what things will impact or could impact someone's life, right? On this side, risk factors: family harmony or breakup, abuse, inconsistent parenting, a carer or caregiver with mental illness or substance abuse, and I will even add to that sometimes a parent who might be focused on caretaking in terms of providing, but not providing the emotional needs of that particular child. It's one that I hear often in different settings. I know you love me, I know she loved me, they took care of me, but I never felt like I belonged. I never felt like she loved me, I felt like she didn't like me, right? Or some of the things that could impact someone adversely on the side of the family. But on the other hand, someone with stable family home environment, warm and supportive parenting, secure attachments and connections with significant others and caregivers, that can make a difference. So you're beginning to see that there are factors that could go one way for someone and the other way for someone. So everyone's life story is a mixed bag of these, from who they are, their family of origin, services that may be available to them in their community, right? We're taking the systems a little wider, to the life events. I've spoken about some that might fall in capital T trauma or not, all the way to societal, the bigger picture, right? Where they're born, what's the resources in their community, what is their ethnicity, what's their race, what country they're born in. All of these factors make a difference in what someone's life story looks like. So what do? We learn to survive. We learn to give context to what we've lived. We learn to figure it out one way or the other, and we use that to inform our future. Right? We use that to inform how we interact with others, how we relate to others. I want to stay a little bit on the common T trauma in terms of relationships and relational trauma, common T. Oftentimes, we end up from our families of origin figuring out how to interact with other people, how to respond, and patterns are developed. There are 4 F's that we talk about in terms of reaction to others. Anyone knows what those 4 F's are? Anyone from my class this morning, you get to cheat a little bit.
Flight, freeze, fawn.
Lovely, lovely. Give her a here. Awesome. Flight, fight, freeze, fawn. Each of us have a lean to one of those 4. You pick yourself or your typical reactions out. Fight. When you're uncomfortable, when stressors come up, when you're triggered, you want to argue, you want to debate, you want to make your point. Is that you? Don't raise your hands, just close your eyes. Right? Flight. Things get a little crazy. You get uncomfortable. Right? Flight. You're like, I'm out of here. I want to see you guys. I'm cutting you off, right? Y'all are the ones who, at the end of the year, you're like, I'm cutting everybody off this year who was toxic to me, right? Yeah. Right? Y'all are the ones that are flight. I'm done. I'm gone. Sometimes it is appropriate. I dare to say sometimes it might be premature. Just my thought. If it's a reaction and every year you're doing that, it suggests to me that you have some things to think about. Okay? Then there's the person who freezes. You're in the middle of a class, professor calls on you, and you're like, I'm really not here. I'm really not here. I'm invisible. Right? You freeze, you shut down. You're the person who gives your partners, your friends, your family the silent treatment. I'm not talking to you. Like, you're there, you're not fleeing, you're there, but you're like really not there, right? That is your typical reaction. And then there's the fawner. Don't raise your hands. I'm not raising mine either. I'm just kidding. In this particular one, you're the one who wants to take care of everyone, say yes to everyone, make sure everyone is fine, even if you're not fine, right? It's what we typically have called in the last 20 years, the people pleasers. 30, 40 years ago, we call them codependents, et cetera, right? That's your typical reaction to scenarios. Why? There are patterns of behaviors instilled in your story from your early childhood, from your family of origin, from your siblings, from your parents, from your teachers in your early years, right? Your classmates, whatever along those lines, where those things happen that were formed in terms of the cement when your brain was being developed, when your sense of self was being developed, when your understanding of the world based on the age-appropriate assignments of those years were happening. These were some patterns that were developed, and now this is how you show up in the world, typically, when stressed and pressured, right? Or when in a position of being or feeling triggered. Triggers. Oftentimes, we call trauma the puppet master of our lives, right? What happens in that scenario? Something happens today, and you have a reaction that is intense. The reaction may be fleeing, fawning, freezing, or fleeing, fawning, freezing, or fawn. Yes, what you guys got the floor. Fight or flight, fawn or freeze. Right? I always remember when I do it in that order. Right? And so that happens, and you have a reaction. Oftentimes, if you find that your reactions or your use or overuse of any of those reactions are intense, most of the times it is 25% or so of what's happening in the moment, and 75% or so stories, experiences, and reactions to the past. So that's why when I hear from my clients or people that I work with in different settings, she triggered me, he triggered me. Oftentimes you spend a little time looking at that word, because oftentimes, yes, there's some truth to what happened right now. But there's a lot more truth to where that came from and why there is a reaction at the level that it happened. And so the work is not just to tell someone, don't trigger me anymore, right? You trigger me, so don't trigger me anymore. The work involves us looking at, a lot of times, what happened in the moment, but if we're not able to take some time to look at where that comes from, right? What that is about. Where did that happen before? Why are we feeling that intense emotion about this particular event, incident, relationship, or exchange? So that we can address and resolve some of that, so that we can perhaps more clearly address the 25% that's in the moment. You guys with me? Fantastic. For me, the opposite of trauma is liberation. It's how we move fight to advocacy, how we move freezing to slowing down and saying, I need a moment, right? How we move fleeing to, I need to take some time. Can we come back to this at a later time when I'm more able to hear what you have to say? And how we move fawning to loving and caring for in a way that's healthy. How we move it to caring and loving well and serving well. That is the work. And as the text there from our Bible says, the thief cometh but to steal and to kill and to destroy. I am come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. As a Christian, I don't believe that God wants us to be dictated, how our traumas dictated to us and hold us as Pinocchios throughout our lives. And that's whether it's capital T traumas or common T traumas. So the work that we can do is the first, and I'll speak about it in a minute, work as it pertains to ourselves and these particular areas, so that we can be better able to serve and hear and listen and provide support and services to others. Overcoming difficulties and trauma in our upbringing and authoring your own story. How do you move through this? By understanding your own story. Everything that I've said to you today, no matter what your next step is, once you leave Holton to serve or help others, it has to start with you. You have to take some time to look at your own story, as I did 30-something years ago with Michael Astoria, and then about 15 years later when I found my own therapist in New York City, when dealing with and confronting some other issues. She's been the same person since then, and I already told her, because she's in her 70s, and when she moves into a nursing home, they're going to call her and tell her there's a lady outside looking for you, and that's going to be me, because I'm going to be her last client ever until she passes over into another life, right? To be with her Savior. So I told her, I'm going to be the one still with you. I appreciate her because she knows my story. She has heard my story. She reminds me sometimes of my own story. She gives me perspective about my own story when I forget certain things or I lose perspective. She reminds me, Judith, remember this, remember that, remember you've worked on that. Or she'll ask about some things that I would rather not remember. But she'll ask about them so that I can sort of look at them again. And I believe, and it is in my practice where I hire individuals to work with me, whether administratively or as therapists, and it's not required by New York State, but anyone who works with me, I require them to be getting some kind of support on their own. I'm not looking to do that work as their therapist while providing supervision for them, right? And if they don't want to, that's fine, but it's something that I require within my practice, and I made that very clear with anyone who works with me in my close circle. Because I'm quite aware that even in our places of work, how much our stories show up, how much what we do, don't do, our reactions shows up even there. So I appreciate them having their own support. That is not me. Right? I'm their supervisor or mentor, but that they get their own supports in other places as they continue to learn and grow through life. It's a tenet, it's a value in my particular practice and in the business that I run. If you want to see your relationship change, the change starts with you. When I talk about the work, this is what I mean. It starts with awareness. You see some of the examples and assignments and homeworks that come with awareness. Hopefully then change, and then practice. Just as I have been with my therapist for the last 15 years, I have clients who have been with me from the time I began my practice over 14 or so years ago, right? And we've moved through those phases on different topics and different subjects. My last client last night and I were talking, she was saying she's been with me for 4 to 5 years, and I think there may be a video of her here somewhere in my presentation. We were just realizing based on something that recently came up that we've talked about her, we've talked about her and her husband, we've talked about her and her children over the past few years. We've talked about her at length, about her and her parents, both of them, because they're going through different changes and developmental phases of life right now, so that's important for her as an adult person of parents who are not doing well in terms of their health. But we've never talked about her and her siblings, right? And so this week she discovered that one of her siblings was receiving money for her mother that she did not know about. And that sibling is not caring for the mother in reality. All of those old stories about her responsibility as the first child and what she needed to do, that was juxtaposed to her anger. What? I'm going to let her have a piece of my mind? How could she be having this money and keeping it and not telling me? And so her session last night was to look at sort of like their early childhood scripts and stories as it relates to their interaction with siblings, so that she could determine the best and healthiest way to approach her sister about this money that she found out about this particular week. So she's been working with me, and there's some awareness that she had, some change, some practice, but last night dropped her right back into which category in terms of her siblings? Awareness, right? Last night we went right back to awareness as it pertains to her relationship with her siblings and her role as a big sister. So that's the work that it requires, but I want you to notice what it says in the second sentence. The change starts with? Okay, y'all are asleep now. The change starts with? You. The change starts with you. That is part of why I stay in my work, because in order for me to support and help the clients that I work with and the people that I work with, not just those that are part of my practice, but the ones that I provide mentorship for and the ones that I support in my church and the ones that I see in my coaching around the world, the people that I have in my family, for me to be well with them, it requires me to be aware of what's happening with me and to do so well. This is another simpler way. The psychiatrist Dr. Gabor Mate mentioned acceptance, authenticity, healthy anger, awareness, autonomy, and agency as some steps towards change. I'm going to see if this works and if I can hear her. Okay. I might have to hit it. Let's see if I hit it on here. It's not working. It didn't this morning either. So we're going to miss her once again. But what she shared was what I shared a little bit about, in that in her work, where she is, so to speak, where she is the trailblazer in terms of mental health, her work on herself has impacted her children. She has shared conversations she's had with her children about decisions that she made before she had awarenesses about how she shows up in the world in the way that she does today. She has spoken to her children about mistakes that she has made. For her, apologizing based on her family scripts, apologizing to your children was not part of the script. So she has learned how to speak to her children and apologize, both about present things as well as past things. Her children are responding back to her about what it looks like to see the her that she's becoming as their parent, and how it opens up a different reality for them in terms of understanding who they are in the world. She's also spoken to her parents about some of this, and no, because they're in their 70s or 80s, they might never themselves go to therapy, but they themselves have recognized the change that has happened with her in her interactions with them, in the way she relates to them, in the way she speaks to them, in the way she treats them. And she just wanted to share a little bit about that in this particular video. So now it comes back down to you, right? We talked about if you want to make change, it starts with you. Do you want to be clever? Do you want to be wise? I'm on my road to being wise. On the road. I'm maybe about twice most of y'all age in here. I'm on the road to being wise because the primary work that I understand that I have to do by the power of the Holy Spirit and with supports around me and community is to look at myself and to constantly be in a place of changing, adjusting, and growing myself. That's all I can control. And I think she said that in her video. She has learned, right, as a first child, and the era and the time in which she was born, and her own phone, and she was really trying to help and fix everyone else. Right? Even when she came in with her husband, she was like, fix him, Judith, fix him! And he said, fix her. Well, right? But she's learning what time that she can't fix him or change him. Right? Her work begins with her, and that's the place of focus. So the next 10 items I want to share with you, I'm going to go through them quickly in the next, hopefully 10 minutes. I can leave about 15 minutes for questions and answers. The following. This is what working on yourself and looking at yourself and reworking your story and listening well to the story of others involves. Look for and be the helper. Has anyone heard that phrase before? Look for and be the helper. That phrase came from Dr. Rogers, who said that his mother shared that from Dr. Rogers' neighborhood, and I'm telling my age based on that, but I've already done so. He spoke about his mother telling him that in times of crisis and major events or scenarios, to look for the helpers. There are always helpers. Why do I do this? Because I feel like one of my life's purpose is to be that helper, right? I do it in different ways, in different settings. But that is what I think part of my purpose is in life. I want to be that helper, right? But I'm also someone who looks for the helpers. I've mentioned a few people's names as I've gone along in terms of helpers in my life, right? My parents are some of my helpers. Even though our relationship today looks very much different than it did 30 years ago, right? There's been some work. There's been the work of God on them and me as well. And then there's been the mental health work I've done on myself simultaneously. But it looks different. They're helpers in my life now. I think it was Professor Gardy passed me by earlier today, and I was on the phone with my dad because when I had a minute to just sit quietly for an hour, my dad called to find out how my day was going, and he worked through his devotions for today with me, right? That's something that is new for us. Was not the case many years ago, right? But again, he's a helper in my life in that particular way. There's some other areas of life that he's not my helper, so I don't go looking for him in those areas. But if I need a good word or prayer, my dad is it, right? I mentioned Professor Young in my career here in the psychology department. Today I mentioned Bill, who has been instrumental in pulling me here to Houghton on many different occasions. Bill, I see what you're doing. Right? Phyllis Gardy, I mentioned Professor Bates, who was a great help to me last semester in terms of that particular course. And of course I mentioned my therapist. So be a helper, but also make sure, even as you're helping others, that you look for helpers in your life also. Right? Address and recognize childhood trauma and relational trauma in your own life and in the life of others that you're there to serve, right? Work under the understanding that every one of us here are dealing with something. I don't care whether it's a capital T trauma found on the ACEs. I don't care whether it's a relational trauma, hurts and wounds that we're carrying. Work with people, interact with them, serve them, and love them in a way that says they are dealing with something, right? Examine the lens, models, and approaches. I share here very transparently and teasingly in terms of the psychology lens that for me some things didn't work, right? I had to broaden my lenses in terms of the different modalities and theories. I have to take a little bit from different ones that work. Because ultimately my clients don't care whether I use CBT, family therapy, whatever one, IFS, they don't really care. In some agencies and organizations and clinics, they might. So you want to respect wherever you're hired. That's the caveat that I want to express. But in essence, the clients don't really care what modality you're using. They just want to feel better, right? So make sure that you're doing your work to examine your lens, examine the models, examine the approaches, right? Number 4, bring together or close some of the different narratives and experiences. I talk often about using the analogy of a car. in terms of the different parts of ourselves. And this takes a little bit from IFS, Internal Family Systems, right? Where there is our inner child, right? Or our early childhood experiences. There is a hypercritical part of ourselves, oftentimes or nowadays being called the what? Inner, you said it? Inner critic, right? Nowadays being called the inner critic. Freud called it the hypercritical voice. And then there's our growing, evolving self, right? They're all three are always present. IFS bring up another 5 other parts of ourselves, but that's too many people in a car, so I just go with the 3, right? And so they're always present. There is a little girl, little boy that's always there in us, every single one of us. Whether you are 20 years old or you're 60 years old. And ever so often, if we're not conscious or aware or mindful, he or she will pop their head up and take the car wheels and drive you over the cliff, right? It is your work as you grow and as you evolve, as you mature, as you be a calm presence, that you hold your inner child back and put them in the back seat, in the car seats, right? And wherever you need to work through those particular things, if it's that pressing for that part of yourself, that you find the places and spaces that are safe to address those things. The same with the inner critic, right? The inner critic had me up until 11:30 last night. This is not good enough. Change this, move this, do this. And at some point, the third part of myself had to say, miss, relax, go to bed, it is done. Remember what Dad said 2 days ago? Do your best, let God do the rest, finish, go to bed, right? Go to bed. And so I had to sort of talk parts of myself through yesterday, right? The first child and the child that was told through my culture, Protestant work ethic, to my Caribbean background, you have to do your best, only the best is best, right? That part of me, all of that had to be had a conversation with last night so that I could finally go to bed and look semi-okay for today, right? So that's the same not only for you, but for your clients and the people with whom you are going to work. Understand that there are many different parts of them at play at times, and sort of help them see which part are showing up and driving the car, okay? And number 5, use different tools. I've mentioned that already here today. Help clients to look at not just what's wrong with them, but what happened to them. I cannot tell you often when I shift this question, what a different conversation looks like with my clients. Why'd you do that? What's wrong with you? Versus, what I usually do is, what happened to you, right? A client comes into my session, I remember a few months ago, and she was livid. The taxi driver was putting her out because she had changed the address in the shared ride thing or whatever else, and she was so upset, and she was just yelling and screaming. And my first question when she came in was not what you do, was what happened to you. And she started with the taxi driver and what happened, and immediately within like 15, 20 minutes, she went to her foster mother putting her out at 18 years old, 17, 18 years old. When the taxi driver said to her, get out my car, get out, immediately she was thrown back to that moment when her foster mother told her, get out my house. You're 18 now, get out my house, right? So we had a conversation about what happened to her, both presently as well as in the past, versus what did you do, or what's wrong with you. Generational impact and historical impact. You've heard me talk about the client that I shared about, that we did see her video, about how her change has impacted both her children and her parents. I've shared a little bit about mine as well, right? How my impact and my change and my growth has even influenced my mom. Every now and again, my mom would make a little joke, tongue-in-cheek, and says, like you would say, Dr. Rapley, and we laugh about it, right? So in a very, just living through my change and my growth, I've impacted her as well. And although I don't have any biological children, I have a clientele of mostly clients who are between the ages of 25 and 35, right? One of my friends the other day called me the queen of the millennials, right? Because that's primarily what my audience is, about 60, 70%. The others are at my age, and I'm glad to serve them too. But I'm also so excited to be able to have impact on those who are younger so that they can learn things that took me 15 years of therapy to learn. They can learn it from now, like even being here today and sharing with you. But then there's also historical impact, understanding for particular audiences and people of particular ethnicities and groups that things go beyond just their family. For example, those of you who are in my class, we spoke about the historical impact of persons of the Asian community and things that have impacted them, right? We spoke about things that have impacted people of African American descent in a different way perhaps. We didn't talk about this, but I'm aware of this. how things impact them, persons of those particular groups, differently than someone who is from the African diaspora or the Caribbean, right? So that we have to be aware of historical impact. I think we also talked about how people from the Jewish faith or ethnicity or groups have also been impacted. So it's important to understand that it's more than just the person, it's more than just the family, but that there's also historical impact that could be affecting someone as well. I've said it several times, but I'm repeating it again. Manage your own stuff. You have to be aware that when you're working with others, that your stuff is present. There's nowhere around it. You can act as professional as you want, but you have to understand and see where your biases may be coming up at different points in time. And listen and hear clearly your client's goals. Oftentimes, my clients don't do what I tell them to do. Why they pay me and then do that, I don't know. But they don't do what I suggested them to do. But they have the right not to. They get to decide what works for them and to make those decisions as they choose to. Again, that's 11. Jump into 12. Technology. I have a love and hate relationship right now with the fact that mental health language is so common. I love that it's common. But I also have some thoughts and feelings of the fact that they're often misused, the language is often misused, used inappropriately, and oftentimes even used and weaponized, right? She triggered me, he's a narcissist, she's bipolar, right? All of those words. So oftentimes I ask my clients when they use that language about someone else, what do you mean by that? Can you describe what that means? Right? So that they begin to take ownership about the language that they're using. And then I oftentimes send them to do deeper research about the words and the concepts as well, so that they use the words well and not out of context and not also in a way that weaponizes the language in mental health. So help your clients to be critical thinkers in terms of that language and not just use the latest Instagram meme to just sort of like hit somebody over the head with mental health language. Be okay with ambiguity. Every client that leaves my office every day, we don't get everything neatly wrapped up. It doesn't happen that way. Sometimes they leave and they have more questions. Sometimes they leave and they're mad at me, right? So be okay with ambiguity, knowing that you're often not going to wrap everything up in a neat little bow at the end of the session, or even by the time they leave working with you. There are clients that after 6 months or a year leave, and I'm like, man, we are just beginning. We weren't even getting through to the awareness part. And the end. Again, it requires you to be okay with letting go at that point. Understand culture, general and specific. I joked about Instagram memes. I am on social. Why am I on social? Because that's where my clients are. And when they come to me and they're bringing up movies or the latest pop culture thing, I have to know what they're talking about. If not, they're like, oh, she don't know what my life is. She doesn't get me. So I am on there and I'm in different settings and realities more than I would personally like to. But when they mention a movie or something, I'm like, yeah, I've seen it. They're like, you've seen that? Right? This past week, a client brought up the movie Imprisoned with Kerry Washington in it. I just saw that movie about 2-3 weeks ago. And it was very interesting that this person whose father, like Kerry Washington in the movie, whose father had been incarcerated, how she took piece by piece this particular movie, right? I was able to share the way in which she related and connected. And after a year of her father, my client's father passing away, for the first time, she was ready to talk about her grief. What helped in that moment is that I knew what she was talking about as it related to the movie, and that helped that conversation to move along in the way that it did and in the flow that it did. Recognize your own challenges, privileges, assets, and resources, right? Yes, I'm a person of color in this country, but I'm a person from the Caribbean. I'm an international person not born here. It is clear to me that as someone not born in the United States of America, that there are, yes, some liabilities that I deal with, but there are also some privileges. There's some ways in which people see me as different or better because I was not born here. I am aware of those privileges, right? I'm also a person who has gone to college. That is not everyone's experience. I understand my privilege in that particular way. Even in 2020, when we were dealing with the George Floyd scenario, I had a client who was about 24 years old, and he told me he was going to go out and be a part of the demonstrations. I did not think that was a good idea in New York City. But he told me that he was going to. And he explained why. I had to respect and understand his position because he had lost his job. I was sitting at my dining room table working remotely, and my work wasn't impacted. In fact, in my case, I had more work, right? I had to understand my privilege as I spoke with him. And so I had to be respectful and understanding, even if I offered him alternatives to working in that way or going on a rioting, right? Because he told me what he was going to do fully. I had to respect and honor his decision, even though I didn't agree with him. And I had to understand it from the perspective that that was not my experience as well. Understand your privilege. Sorry for the missing R. Understand your privilege in work. Be constantly growing, assessing, and reassessing. You've heard me talk about that. I'm constantly learning. I'm constantly going to trainings. I have my own therapy that I have. Even though I've had that one same therapist for the last 15 years, I've had other coaches in very specific areas or ways that have helped me at different points in time as well. So you have to invest in yourself. You have to grow because it's essential for your continued growth and availability. The more you grow, the more your clients grow. I tell my clients all the time, as I'm growing and moving, so are they. As I'm learning, getting my continued education credits, I'm bringing in new models and new understandings to my work. That is part of my lifelong journey. Self-care, yes. Self-care is not a luxury for you in this field. It's a requirement. What do I mean by this field? Psychology, coaching, mentorship, pastoring, any of those caring professions, right? You have to take care of yourself. I was speaking to the president about that at lunchtime. We were both talking about that, sharing war stories and learning that we've had over the last 10 to 15 years, right? It is essential. You have to take care of yourself. You are the vessel, right? God is the one who's doing the work, but you are the vessel. You have to take care of the vessel. You have to take care of what He has given you. As I said to him, I hope to do what I'm doing right now for at least 20 more years. For me to do that, I have to care for myself well. And you'll see some ways in which I did in a minute. And ultimately, and this is important, and I want to land here, you don't save. Jesus saves, not you. It is not your work to save anyone. Not your family, not your clients, no one that you will encounter. It is not your work to save. It is your work, as Mr. Rogers said, or his mother said, to come alongside them and be a helper, to be a transformational presence. So why am I doing this? I'm doing this and having this conversation because it's essential to me and for me that as you go out in the world and you help others and you see others, that you do the work that's required so that you can be healthy helpers. That's the reason why this is important, that you join with the power of the Holy Spirit and with the transformational power of God in changing your life, in healing from your hurts and traumas and wounds, so that you can show up a vessel, an accepted vessel, worthy to support and assist the help of others. That is my desire for each and every one of you. This is some of me, some of my self-care, right? Yes, this can happen at this point in my career. It was not happening in the first 15 to 20 years, right? People see what they see now, and they think, oh, she's always traveling. She did not travel for a good number of years. But in the last couple of years, since COVID, I've decided that this is one thing that brings me life and brings me joy. So all year long, I've stopped spending, I save up my little pennies, and then boom, I have this big vacation once a year. And the first one, I think that was somewhere in France. The second one was somewhere upstate New York in a lavender field. And the last one was, yes, the Vatican. I danced in front of the Vatican. And that I look forward to, and that was fun. If you want to connect with me on all the stuff and places you all connect, here is my information. You can kind of take stock of it. My book is at the register at the bookstore right now. You want to go in, check it out, or buy it. Please help them move those books along here. So feel free to do so. And one last little gift. Ready for the last gift? Here's a reading list. If you have your camera, take a picture. Grab these books. I think that they're all instrumental in different ways. Take a stock of them. And Professor Young, the bonus book that I'm suggesting is Cultural Competencies for Practice. That's the book, the textbook that I used last semester. That was a joy to me. It was a helpful tool. Any of you already have it, can attest to it. I think that there's great information in that particular book to help you in terms of cultural competency and being a good listener. And so it's by Susan Smith. And my book is number 10. Number 9 is my pastor's book. I go to a church in Brooklyn called New Life Fellowship. It's a church where the modality in terms of emotionally healthy spirituality began. And I love being there because it's a place where there's a healthy combination of spirituality, following Christ, but doing so in a healthy way. And so it really aligns with who I am today and the things that I need to work on still as well. And so I'm there. And then there are a couple of others that I think could be useful in your learning and in your growth. So that's the book. And then I want to leave the last 10 minutes for questions, if there are any. Thoughts, questions, comments? Please, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's obvious you're also a business person who,
yes.
And we have a number of business students here.
Yes.
I wonder if you could talk about being a business person and in your particular role and how you promote and advertise in this kind of particular field, do public relations.
Good question. I didn't expect that one. So I've done many different things over the years, and that goes from a lot of people find me online through the work that happens or the promotions that happen in terms of social media. Every now and again, I put ads out. When I first started, about the first 7 to 8 years, the majority of my promotion came from word of mouth. People sharing with others that they were seeing me in their churches, in their friend groups, in their families. And then I sort of expanded outside of my circle because I had either seen people who needed the help within my circle, and I had to get a little broader. So that's when I went and created my website, which is again, once again after 13 years under development again. And I constantly am working and having people work on my social media to put out what I'm doing, information, and them getting to know me because that's what people want to see. So I do those things. I also am on a number of different listings throughout the city and throughout the country. Different listings of people who need therapy listings and so forth. I do that and I invest in that monthly. Do they always yield directly? No. Every now and again, every month I look at my bill and I'm like, I didn't get any clients from any of these things. But you never know exactly what the warm-up and the indirect movement might be where that's concerned. Business is not the particular area that I love of the work that I do. It's a requirement. So every Monday morning, I punish myself from about 10 a.m. in the morning to about 4 p.m. and I do all my business-related stuff. And I tell myself if I'm good and I do it well, then I get to have junk food on Thursday evening, which is on my weekends, because then I start over again on Friday, talking about self-care. Friday is my Sabbath. I do not work on Fridays. I don't even talk to my mom on Fridays unless it's an emergency. She knows that already, so she'll text, hope you have a good day. Mom, I will. If I don't, I'll contact you. But so I kind of give myself a reward on Thursday nights for buckling down. Oftentimes, when you're a business owner and you prefer to be the doer in terms of the work that you do, it's not the funnest thing for you to do the business aspect of things. So I make myself do it on Mondays, get it out of the way. I see my clients the other 4 or so days, and then I give myself a day of rest on Friday and Sunday mornings. So hopefully that answers some questions for the business students here as well. Great question. Thank you for asking. Other questions? I'll take a few more. Come on. The class this morning had 15 students and I had about 10 questions. So come on, you guys are more than 15. You're about 60, I counted. Come on, don't be shy. That might be the reason too. There are more people in this class. Feel free to ask your questions. Who will be the brave? Go ahead. Love. Thank you.
How do you incorporate your faith into your work?
Good question. I'm a child of God. It is not something separate from me. My mentality about the sacred is that it's all sacred. Right? I'm a vessel of God. Anyone that goes and looks at anything that I carefully curate and put out there, they can see very clearly that I'm a Christian. And so in my work, I try to respect where my clients are coming from. If they have not shared the specificity of them being a Christian, I try to be respectful. But I find ways, and I've always done, that's been a strategy that I guess has been given to me for a long time, to sort of reword things and present it to them. When opportunities arise, that there's an open door, Judith runs right in, right? And there are moments when that has happened, and I really take full advantage of that. Every morning, another way, right, besides directly, every morning before I begin my day, I sit with my book, my notebook, my schedule, and I put every one of my clients before God, whether they're Christians or not. At the end of the day, I close my book again, and I leave them before God. And then on Thursdays, when I sign off for a good 24 hours where I don't talk to anyone, I said, God, whatever has happened this week, you take it in your hands. Complete the work, because this is your work, these are your people, and bring it to fruition. And Lord, if there's anything that I need to say or do to bring them closer to you, let me be that vessel. That's how I choose to incorporate my Christianity in the fullness of who I am in a holistic way. Great, great, great questions. A few others. Are they doing church? Is there one? All right, well, I'm going to wrap up because what I'm going to do is that I'm going to stay for another 10 to 15 minutes here. Because yes, believe it or not, I too am an introvert. And I probably typically would not ask questions out loud. So I want to make room for the introverts like me, that who may not want to ask their questions out loud, and you are more than free to come by and ask me questions. But before you go, I have to take a picture because my team will not believe that I was really here, right? They're gonna be like, no, you just didn't want to work this week. So you were really here. If anyone is not comfortable, I want to give respect to that. You can feel free to either duck down, put your head down, or anything of that nature, or leave or stand outside. But I want to grab a picture if that's okay. I have to have proof. You all know what do y'all call it? Receipts. I have receipts that I received. Are you laughing so loud at me? Maybe like Miss Judith, run receipts. All right. So Wade, put your pictures on whatever you think is best. Ready, set, go. Lovely. Again, I thank you all so very much. I'll be here for a few moments. I know, I even know how to do a selfie or